Marcus Webb sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when a man's failures arrange themselves in neat rows like unpaid bills.
Breathe!
The overhead light buzzed fluorescent and unforgiving casting shadows
Hey,
across
how
the
are you
stack
feeling
of
today?
envelopes he'd been avoiding for
Better,
3
now that
days.
you're here.
I'm not
His
going
calloused
anywhere.
fingers counted the cash one more time as if the bills might multiply through sheer desperation. $11.40. The number hadn't changed since the last count or the one before that. The electric bill sat on top of the pile, red letters screaming final notice across white paper. $127. Below that, Sophie's basketball tournament registration form, $45 due by Saturday morning. And somewhere in the junk drawer pushed to the back where he didn't have to look at it every day, the pharmacy reminder for Grace's asthma inhaler refill. $38 copay. Marcus rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the 3-day stubble, the exhaustion that had become permanent somewhere around 2015. 42 years old. Single father. Mechanic at Tony's Auto Repair on West 47th, where the smell of motor oil had soaked so deep into his clothes that he couldn't remember what clean laundry smelled like anymore. $14 an hour. No benefits. No overtime pay. Though he worked it anyway because Tony Moretti had the leverage and knew it. The lie formed in his mind the way it did every week, automatic as breathing. You always figure it out. And every week somehow the lie came true. He skipped meals. He worked hours nobody paid him for. He never, not once, let his daughters see him sweat. But tonight, the math didn't work. He opened the refrigerator, though he already knew what he'd find. 3 eggs in a carton meant for a dozen. Half a gallon of milk 2 days past the date stamped on the plastic. A jar of peanut butter with maybe 3 sandwiches left at the bottom. The jelly had run out on Tuesday. Jelly was a luxury this week, same as it had been last week and the week before that. November in Chicago didn't forgive you for being broke. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through everything: your coat, your pride, your patience. Marcus had learned to ignore the cold the same way he'd learned to ignore hunger, but his daughters shouldn't have to. Sophie was 13, old enough to notice the gaps between grocery runs, smart enough to stop asking for things she knew he couldn't afford. Grace was 9, still young enough to believe her father could fix anything, and Marcus intended to keep that illusion alive as long as possible. The house creaked around him, settling into its foundation the way old houses do. The place leaned slightly to the left, a structural quirk the landlord had blamed on the clay soil beneath West Englewood. Marcus had stopped complaining about it after the 3rd time his rent check bounced. A man living in a house that tilted didn't get to make demands about repairs. Upstairs, both girls slept. Sophie in the room she'd outgrown 3 years ago, her long legs hanging off the end of a twin bed meant for a child. Grace curled around a stuffed elephant named Gerald, her breathing steady through the night. The inhaler sat on her nightstand, nearly empty. 4, maybe 5 doses left before the prescription ran out. And then what? You didn't negotiate with asthma. You didn't explain to a 9-year-old's lungs that Daddy needed another week to come up with $38. Marcus had been a mechanical engineer once. University of Illinois, graduated 3rd in his class with a degree in a field that had felt like a guarantee back in 2003. He'd designed industrial HVAC systems for Meridian Manufacturing, the kind of work where you saw your blueprints turn into steel and copper, where buildings in 14 states kept people comfortable because of calculations you'd made at a desk in Schaumburg. Good salary. Benefits package. A 401k he'd been stupid enough to believe would matter someday. Then 2009 hit, and the company restructured, which was corporate speak for deciding that Marcus Webb and 200 others like him were expendable. The HR woman, he still remembered her face. The practiced sympathy had used the phrase, going in a different direction, as if his entire career were a road trip they'd decided to bail on halfway through. His wife Andrea left a year later. Not because of the money, she'd said, though the money sure as hell hadn't helped. She'd looked at him across the same kitchen table where he sat now and delivered the words that still echoed when he let them. "You'll never be anything more than a failure, Marcus. I can't watch you drown anymore." Then she'd moved to Denver, remarried some middle management guy who knew how to keep a job and sent exactly 0 child support checks. Marcus had drowned quietly after that, slowly. The kind of drowning where you're still standing, still breathing, still showing up to fix other people's trucks for $14 an hour while the degree on your wall gathered dust in a closet. He'd applied to 73 engineering jobs in the first year, then 52, then 20. Then he stopped counting because the rejection emails all said the same thing in different words. We've decided to pursue other candidates. The world had decided Marcus Webb was a mechanic now, and who was he to argue? He stood joints protesting the movement and walked to the junk drawer. The envelope was there taped to the back panel where he'd hidden it from himself 3 months ago. Emergency money. $68 in 5s and 10s money he'd squirreled away from tips and the occasional cash job Tony threw him under the table. Money he'd saved by telling himself he couldn't touch it unless the emergency was real. Sophie's basketball tournament counted as real. The girl had talent, the kind coaches noticed, the kind that might lead somewhere if Marcus didn't screw it up. She'd scored 16 points in the last game, moving with a grace that reminded him of Andrea before everything went wrong. The travel team tryouts were coming up next month, $220 Marcus didn't have, but that was next month's problem. Today's problem was $45. He peeled off the bills, counted twice to be sure, and sealed the envelope back up. $23 left for emergencies. The electric company would have to wait another week. They'd wait because they had to, because Marcus would walk into that office on Monday with cash in hand and a story about his paycheck being delayed, and the woman behind the desk would make the same note she made every month, account delinquent pending cutoff. Then she'd take his money and reset the clock for another 30 days. That was the deal. That was the arrangement. You showed up, you shut up, you did the work, and you took what they gave you. Marcus's phone buzzed on the counter, vibrating against the laminate with a sound like a dying bee. Unknown number. He ignored it. Bill collectors had his number, and he had nothing to say to them that would change the math. The phone buzzed again, then a third time, then a fourth, insistent, refusing to take silence for an answer. He grabbed it more from irritation than curiosity, thumb-swiping to silence the call. The buzzing stopped. 2 seconds later it started again. Marcus answered. This time his voice flat with exhaustion and the particular kind of anger that comes from being poor in America. Yeah. A woman's voice, professional and controlled, the kind of voice that came with an assistant and a corner office. Measured words, each syllable precisely placed. Mr. Webb, this is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling on behalf of Dr. Rachel Sterling. The name meant nothing to him. Marcus leaned against the counter, already forming the words to tell whoever this was that he wasn't interested, wasn't buying, wasn't available for whatever survey or scam or solar panel pitch they were selling. I don't know who that is. A pause on the other end, just long enough for Marcus to register that this wasn't a robocall. Someone was actually listening. Dr. Sterling is the woman you pulled from the Pleasant Valley River last night. She's recovering at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The words hit Marcus like cold water. Last night. The river. The Mercedes spinning on ice, breaking through the guardrail, disappearing into black water 40 feet below. The woman's face behind the windshield, blonde hair, floating, mouth open, eyes closed. He'd jumped. Hadn't thought about it, hadn't weighed the risks, hadn't done the mental calculation that a reasonable man might do before diving off a bridge into freezing water in November. He'd just seen someone dying and been the only one there to do something about it. The rest came back in fragments. The shock of hitting water so cold it felt like being hit with a baseball bat. The car sinking nose first, headlights dimming. His fists splitting open on safety glass. The woman's weight in his arms as he kicked toward the surface. CPR on the frozen riverbank, 4 minutes that felt like 40. His own body shutting down from hypothermia while he forced air into her lungs and prayed to a God he'd stopped believing in that she'd cough. She had coughed. Water had erupted from her mouth and she'd gasped, and the paramedics had arrived, and then everything had been lights and noise and someone wrapping a thermal blanket around his shoulders while he'd sat there shivering, wondering who was going to pay Mrs. Kowalski for the extra hours. Marcus had spent 2 days in the hospital, forced into observation despite his protests. Gash on his right forearm 15 stitches. Index and middle fingers on his left hand fractured. Body temperature dropped to 93.5 degrees Fahrenheit before they'd warmed him up enough to stop the shaking. The doctors had used words like hypothermic and lucky to be alive, and Marcus had used words like I can't afford this and I have kids at home. They'd released him Saturday afternoon with discharge papers he'd stuffed in a drawer and a hospital bill he hadn't opened yet. $1,240 according to the number visible through the envelope window. His insurance, the catastrophic plan that covered almost nothing, would pay 60% if he was lucky. That left $496 he didn't have on top of the $127 he already didn't have on top of everything else. Sarah Mitchell's voice pulled him back to the present. Dr. Sterling would like to thank you personally. She's asked to see you. Marcus closed his eyes. The phone pressed to his ear and felt the familiar weight of obligations settling on his shoulders. He didn't want gratitude, didn't want a handshake or a photo opportunity or whatever gesture rich people made when someone pulled them out of a river. He wanted to go to bed. He wanted his daughters to have health insurance and full meals and a father who wasn't one missed paycheck away from eviction. Tell her I'm glad she's alive. She doesn't owe me anything. Mr. Webb. Dr. Sterling is quite insistent. I don't care if she's the Queen of England. I'm at work. I've got a transmission to pull and a boss who docks my pay if I take long breaks. Silence on the other end, the kind of silence that suggested Sarah Mitchell wasn't used to being told no. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted just slightly from professional to something that might have been genuine curiosity. May I tell her you'll consider a visit? You can tell her whatever you want. I've got to go. He hung up before she could respond, set the phone face down on the counter and stared at the kitchen wall. The paint was yellowing, peeling in one corner where water damage had spread from a leak he'd patched himself with caulk and optimism. A man's home, they said, was his castle. Marcus's castle leaned to the left and smelled like motor oil. And somewhere in a hospital across town, a woman he'd never met wanted to thank him for doing what any decent person would have done. He'd jumped because she was dying. That was it. No calculation, no heroism, just the raw and stupid and beautiful instinct that separated people who acted from people who watched. And now she wanted to see him, wanted to offer something he couldn't afford to want because wanting things had stopped working for Marcus Webb a long time ago. The phone buzzed again. He let it ring. Friday morning came too early and too cold. Marcus woke at 5:30, same as every day, his body trained like a machine that didn't know how to sleep in anymore. Years of early shifts and single-parent mornings had wired his brain to wake with the first hint of light regardless of whether he'd slept 3 hours or 6. His left hand throbbed, the 2 broken fingers splinted and wrapped. The stitches in his right forearm pulled when he bent his elbow, a sharp reminder that jumping off bridges into frozen rivers had consequences. He'd told Sophie and Grace it was a work accident, a minor thing, nothing to worry about. Sophie hadn't believed him. Grace had drawn a picture of Daddy the superhero saving a princess from a dragon, which now hung on the refrigerator next to last month's electric bill. Tony's auto repair opened at 6. Marcus arrived at 5:45, letting himself in through the side door with the key Tony had given him 6 years ago, back when Marcus had still been new enough to be grateful for the job. The shop smelled like grease and brake fluid and disappointment, a combination Marcus had long since stopped noticing. The 2018 Chevy Silverado he'd been working on yesterday sat on the lift, its transmission, half-disassembled parts laid out in the order he'd need to reassemble them. Marcus had a system, a mental catalog of every bolt and seal and gasket, the kind of organizational skill that had made him a good engineer and made him a reliable mechanic. Different applications, same brain. He'd been under the truck for 20 minutes when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Unknown number. He ignored it, focusing on the torque wrench in his good hand, the delicate work of not stripping threads while working with broken fingers. The phone buzzed again, and again, 4 times in 2 minutes. Marcus rolled out from under the Silverado, wiped his hands on a rag that had been cleaned sometime in 2019, and answered with the kind of irritation that came from being interrupted during precision work. Yeah. Sarah Mitchell's voice, unmistakable now, professional persistence wrapped in polite words. "Mr. Webb, I apologize for calling again, but I already told you. I'm working. I don't have time for this. Dr. Sterling has authorized me to discuss compensation for your bravery." The word compensation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus set the wrench down carefully, his engineer's brain already running calculations he didn't want to run. Compensation meant money. Money meant bills paid, groceries bought, Sophie's tournament fee covered with something left over. Money meant breathing room, the kind of space Marcus hadn't had in 13 years. He forced the thought down, buried it beneath the pride that was the last wall standing between him and the world's pity. "I told her, I don't want her money, Mr. Webb. Dr. Sterling would like to offer you $50,000. The number landed like a physical blow. 50,000. Marcus's annual salary at Tony's was $29,000 before taxes. 50,000 was nearly 2 years of work, 2 years of waking up at 5:30 and going to bed exhausted, 2 years of counting change and skipping meals and telling his daughters that things were fine when they weren't. 50,000 was Sophie's travel team fees for the next 3 years. It was Grace's inhaler refills without checking the bank account first. It was the electric bill paid on time, the landlord paid in advance, the refrigerator stocked with actual food instead of whatever had been on sale. 50,000 was a lie because if Marcus took it, the thing he'd done jumping into freezing water to save a stranger stopped being the right thing and started being a transaction. And he needed it to be the right thing. He needed that more than he needed anything Sarah Mitchell's boss could offer. "No. I'm sorry I said no. Tell Dr. Sterling I appreciate the thought, but I'm not interested." "Mr. Webb, I don't think you understand. This is $50,000. Cash. We can wire it to your account today." Marcus looked around the shop at the concrete floor stained with decades of oil, at the fluorescent lights that flickered when the weather changed, at the 1987 Buick LeSabre that had been sitting in the corner for 2 years because the owner couldn't afford the repair quote. This was his world. $14 an hour, broken fingers, a boss who counted bathroom breaks. "I understand fine. The answer's no." "May I ask why?" The question caught him off guard, genuine curiosity instead of corporate script. Marcus leaned against the workbench, suddenly tired in a way that had nothing to do with waking up early. "Because if I take it, what I did becomes a transaction. It becomes something I did for money instead of something I did because it was right. And I need it to be right, Ms. Mitchell. I need that more than I need $50,000. Silence on the other end, long enough that Marcus thought she'd hung up. When Sarah Mitchell spoke again, her voice had changed, the professional veneer cracking just enough to reveal something human underneath. "Dr. Sterling said you'd say that. Then why'd you call?" "Because she asked me to, and because she wanted me to tell you that if you won't accept money, she has something else to offer. A problem only you can solve. I fix cars, Ms. Mitchell. I don't solve billionaire problems. Please, Mr. Webb, just one meeting, 30 minutes. If you're not interested after that, I won't call again." Marcus closed his eyes, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the trap closing. Rich people didn't give up. They persisted, negotiated, wore you down with politeness until saying no felt harder than saying yes. And somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the pride and the exhaustion and the very reasonable fear of getting his hopes up, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, listening wouldn't hurt. "One meeting. 30 minutes. Then I'm done." "Thank you, Mr. Webb. Dr. Sterling is still at Northwestern Memorial Room 814. Would tomorrow afternoon work? I've got my daughter's basketball tournament in the morning. I can come after." "Perfect. I'll let Dr. Sterling know. And Mr. Webb, thank you for saving her life." Sarah Mitchell hung up before Marcus could respond. He stood in the shop phone in his oil-stained hand and wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of cold that made your bones ache. Marcus woke to find Sophie already dressed in her team uniform, sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of plain oatmeal she'd made herself. No brown sugar, no fruit, just oats and water, the kind of breakfast that kept you alive without pretending to be enjoyable. She looked up when he walked in, her expression carefully neutral in that way 13-year-olds had when they were trying not to burden their parents with feelings. "Morning, Dad." "Morning, Soph. You ready, I guess?" She wasn't guessing. Sophie was the kind of kid who'd been ready for the tournament since the moment she'd learned about it, who'd been shooting free throws in the driveway until dark every night this week, who wanted this badly enough that Marcus could see it in the way she held her shoulders. But she was also the kind of kid who'd learned not to want things too loudly, not to make demands, not to add pressure to a father who was already breaking under the weight of keeping two kids alive on nothing. Marcus poured himself coffee from the pot Sophie had made. She'd learned how at age 10, around the same time she'd learned how to make box mac and cheese and check whether the milk had gone bad, and sat across from her. "You nervous?" "A little." "You'll be great, Soph. You always are." She smiled small and genuine, and for a moment Marcus could see the little girl she'd been before life had forced her to grow up too fast. Then the smile faded, replaced by something that looked too much like worry. "Dad, did you pay the fee?" The question landed with familiar weight. Sophie had learned to ask directly, no preamble, because dancing around money just made it worse. Marcus pulled the $45 from his pocket bills, folded in half, and set them on the table. "Paying it when we get there." Relief flashed across her face there, and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. She nodded once and went back to her oatmeal, and Marcus felt the shame of it settle in his chest. His daughter shouldn't have to worry about whether her father could scrape together $45. She should be worrying about her jump shot or grades, whether the boy in her math class liked her back. Instead, she was worrying about money, about whether saying yes to basketball meant saying no to something else. Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, still in her pajamas, dragging Gerald the elephant by one worn ear. Her hair stuck up in 3 directions, and she had that sleepy, rumpled look that 9-year-olds perfected. "Is today the basketball day?" "Yep. Your sister's going to destroy the competition." "I don't destroy anyone, Dad. It's a recreational league." "You're going to recreationally destroy them." Grace giggled, the sound bright and uncomplicated, and Marcus felt something in his chest loosen. This was why he did it. This was why he woke up at 5:30 and worked jobs that paid nothing, and swallowed his pride every single day. For the sound of his 9-year-old laughing at a stupid joke, for the sight of his 13-year-old trying not to smile. They drove to the community center on West Garfield in Marcus's 2004 Ford pickup, the one that burned oil and needed a new alternator and made concerning noises whenever he hit 40 miles per hour. The parking lot was full of minivans and SUVs, other parents milling around with coffee cups and team jackets, and the easy confidence of people who didn't have to choose between tournament fees and electricity. Marcus walked Sophie to the check-in table, the $45 counted out in 5s and 10s. The volunteer behind the table, a woman in her 50s with a school district lanyard around her neck, counted the bills twice and stamped a receipt. Sophie's name went on the roster. The money disappeared into a cash box. $45 gone. 23 left until Thursday's paycheck. Marcus found a seat in the bleachers with Grace and watched his daughter warm up. Sophie was good, really good. Tall for her age, quick hands, the kind of court awareness that couldn't be taught. She moved like she was thinking 2 steps ahead of everyone else, and she probably was. That was Sophie. Always planning, always calculating, always 3 moves ahead in a game nobody else realized they were playing. The first game started at 9:30. Sophie's team won by 12 points. She scored 14 of them, moving through defenders like water her crossover in the 3rd quarter, drawing appreciative murmurs from the parents around Marcus. He clapped until his hands hurt. Grace screaming encouragement from beside him, and for exactly 92 minutes Marcus Webb forgot about money. Then the game ended and reality came back. Sophie jogged over after flushed and grinning, sweat dampening her hairline. "Did you see that crossover in the 3rd quarter? I saw it. Where'd you learn that, YouTube?" "YouTube's coaching you better than Coach Williams." "Don't tell him that. Your secret's safe with me." She hesitated, glancing at Grace, then back at Marcus. The grin faded, replaced by something more serious, more careful. "Dad, there's travel team tryouts next month." Marcus's stomach dropped. He knew what was coming before she said it. "Coach says I should go, but there's a fee." "How much?" $220. $220. more than half his weekly paycheck. Money he didn't have, couldn't magic into existence no matter how many hours he worked or how many meals he skipped. Marcus kept his face neutral, the mask he'd perfected over 13 years of poverty, and nodded once. "We'll figure it out, Soph." The words came out automatic, the lie he told every week. Sophie looked at him with those old eyes that had seen too much, understood too much, worried too much. "Dad, we'll figure it out. Go celebrate with your team." She went because she was a good kid who knew when to push and when to let it go. Marcus watched her rejoin her teammates, watched them laugh and high-five, and exist in a world where $220 didn't determine whether you got to pursue the thing you loved. Grace tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, can we get hot chocolate from the machine?" Marcus had $3 in quarters in his pocket saved for parking meters and emergency vending machines. The hot chocolate cost $1.50. That left $1.50 for the rest of the day for whatever might come up for the cushion that kept catastrophe at bay. "Sure, baby." He bought her the hot chocolate, watched her cradle the paper cup like it was treasure, and did the math in his head for the 100th time. $23 left, minus $1.50. $21.50 until Thursday. Gas to get through the week, maybe $8. That left $13.50 for everything else. The second game started at 11. Sophie's team won again, this time by 15. She scored 12, assisted on another 6, and played defense like she'd been reading the other team's playbook in her sleep. After the game, Marcus dropped both girls at Mrs. Kowalski's house $10 an hour, money he'd pay on Thursday when his check cleared, and drove to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The building rose against the Chicago skyline like a monument to everything Marcus couldn't afford. 44 stories of glass and steel, the kind of place where the lobby had marble floors and the elevators played soft jazz. Marcus parked 3 blocks away because the hospital parking garage cost more per hour than he made at Tony's. He walked through the front doors in his cleanest jeans and the button-down shirt he'd ironed that morning, work boots polished to a shine that didn't quite hide their age. The security guard at the front desk looked up, took in Marcus's appearance, and his expression shifted from professional courtesy to something that might have been mild suspicion. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Dr. Rachel Sterling, room 814. The guard typed something into his computer, frowned, typed again. His frown deepened. "I don't see you in the system, sir. Sarah Mitchell called me. She said Dr. Sterling was expecting me." The guard picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, his eyes never leaving Marcus. The conversation lasted 15 seconds. When he hung up, his entire demeanor had changed, suspicion replaced by something closer to confusion. "Executive elevator, sir. To your right. 2, 8th floor. Ms. Mitchell is waiting." The executive elevator was different from the regular elevators. Quieter. Faster. The kind of elevator that existed in a separate reality from the one Marcus inhabited, where things worked smoothly and nobody had to count change. The doors opened on the 8th floor to reveal a hallway that looked more like a hotel than a hospital. Carpet instead of linoleum. Individual rooms with actual doors instead of curtains. Money bought a lot of things in America, and apparently one of them was dignity when you were sick. Sarah Mitchell stood outside room 814, exactly as professional in person as she'd been on the phone. Tall, early 30s, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. She extended her hand. "Mr. Webb, thank you for coming. You're persistent, Ms. Mitchell. It's my job. Dr. Sterling is awake and expecting you. I should warn you, she tires easily. The doctors have asked that visits stay under 30 minutes. Wasn't planning on staying long." Sarah opened the door. Marcus stepped into a room that looked nothing like the hospital rooms he remembered from his own stay. Large private windows overlooking the city. Flowers everywhere, lilies, roses, arrangements that probably cost more than his rent. Medical equipment hummed quietly in the background, but even the machines seemed nicer here, sleeker, less intrusive. In the bed, propped against pillows, was the woman he'd pulled from the river. Dr. Rachel Sterling looked different, dry. Late 40s, blonde hair, pulled back, face pale but sharp. The kind of face that was used to being in charge of rooms, conversations, everything. An IV ran into her left arm. A pulse monitor beeped softly on her finger, but her eyes, blue bright, completely focused on Marcus the second he walked in. Those were exactly the same as they'd been when she'd gasped awake on the frozen riverbank. Marcus Webb. Her voice was steady despite the pallor, controlled despite the hospital gown and the tubes and the obvious weakness. This was a woman who ran a company worth billions, who sat in boardrooms and made decisions that affected thousands of lives, and even flat on her back, recovering from near death, she radiated authority. Dr. Sterling. Please don't call me doctor. I've been called doctor by enough medical staff this week to last a lifetime. I'm Rachel. All right, Rachel. Sit down, please. Marcus sat in the chair beside her bed, too comfortable, the kind of chair that cost more than his couch. He shifted, uncomfortable with the comfort, and waited. For a moment neither of them spoke. The monitor beeped. The flowers sat there, being expensive. Rachel studied Marcus with the intensity of someone who'd built a career on reading people, on seeing past surfaces to whatever truth lay underneath. I remember your voice. In the water. After. When I was on the bank. I couldn't see, everything was blurry cold, but I heard you. What did I say? Wake up, now. Marcus remembered. The desperation in his own voice, the certainty that if he couldn't get her breathing in the next 30 seconds, she wouldn't breathe at all. The feeling of her ribcage under his palms, fragile and human and dependent on him not giving up. It worked. Yes. Well, you did the hard part. You woke me up. Rachel smiled. It was a tired smile, but real, the kind that came from a place beyond business. Marcus found himself returning it despite his better judgment. The doctor said another minute in that water and I wouldn't have made it. My core temperature was 89 degrees when they brought me in. I was in hypothermic cardiac arrest for... She stopped, looked at him carefully. You don't need the medical details, do you? I just need to know you're okay. I'm okay because of you. Marcus nodded. Then he stood up, the movement abrupt, final. Well, I'm glad. Take care of yourself, Rachel. Wait, that's it. You're leaving. You said you wanted to look me in the eye and say thank you. You did. I don't need anything else. Rachel's expression shifted, something flickering behind those blue eyes that might have been surprise, might have been respect, might have been the first crack in whatever plan she'd been forming. Marcus, sit down. Something in her voice made him sit. Not the authority. Marcus had spent 13 years being ordered around by people with authority and had learned to ignore it when necessary. No, this was something else. Urgency. The tone of someone who needed to say something important and was watching her chance walk away. Sarah told you I wanted to offer compensation. She did. And I refused. Why? The question was direct, no corporate padding, no politeness, just genuine curiosity from someone who'd probably never met anyone who turned down $50,000. Marcus looked at her. This woman who'd nearly died in freezing water, who ran a company worth billions, who lived in a world so far removed from his that they might as well be different species. And he told her the truth. Because you don't pay someone for doing the right thing. That's not how it works. I didn't pull you out of that river so I could collect a reward. I pulled you out because you were dying and I was there. And if you told me right now you wanted to give me $1 million, I'd say the same thing. 5 million. Same thing. Rachel studied him the way an engineer studies a problem, carefully, completely, with the quiet confidence of someone who would eventually find the solution. When she spoke, her voice had softened, the CEO mask slipping just enough to reveal something more human underneath. You're a proud man. I'm a broke man. There's a difference. Proud men say no because they think they're above it. I'm saying no because if I take your money, the thing I did stops being the right thing and starts being a transaction. And I need it to be the right thing, Rachel. I need that more than I need whatever you're offering. The monitor beeped. The flowers sat there. Rachel leaned back against her pillows and exhaled slowly, something shifting in her expression. Not defeat. Marcus suspected this woman didn't do defeat but recalculation, a new strategy forming behind eyes that had built an empire from nothing. Sarah, would you give us the room? Sarah Mitchell, who'd been standing silently by the door, hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then she nodded and slipped out, closing the door behind her with the soft click of expensive hardware. Rachel reached for the glass of water on her nightstand. Her hand trembled slightly, the only visible sign of how close she'd come to dying. Marcus leaned forward, automatically steadying the glass. Their fingers touched briefly, his calloused and scarred, hers pale and shaking, and for a moment they were just two people, one helping the other drink water. "Thank you. Drink." She drank, set the glass down, then looked at Marcus with an expression that was no longer the grateful CEO in a hospital bed. This was something harder, sharper, something that had built a billion-dollar company from nothing and wasn't about to take no for an answer. "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen before you respond." "I'm listening." "I didn't get where I am by ignoring talent. I've spent 30 years building apex medical technologies, and the single most important skill I've developed isn't strategy or finance or leadership. It's recognizing people. Knowing who someone is, not what they show you, but who they actually are in the first 10 seconds of meeting them." Marcus said nothing, waiting. "You jumped off a 40-foot bridge into a freezing river to save a stranger. You performed CPR until I came back. You refused payment. You drove home and helped your daughters with homework. How do you know about the homework? Sarah is very thorough." Marcus didn't like that. It must have shown on his face because Rachel's expression softened. "I'm not surveilling you. I asked her to find out who you were, that's all. And what she found was interesting." "I'm not interesting. You have a degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois. You graduated third in your class. You worked at Meridian Manufacturing for 6 years as a design engineer before being laid off during the 2009 restructuring. Since then, you've been working as an automotive mechanic." Marcus's jaw tightened. His past laid out like evidence in a trial he hadn't agreed to attend. "That's my business." "You're right. It is. And I'm bringing it up because I have a problem that your business might solve. I fix cars, Rachel. I don't solve billionaire problems. You fix things. That's what engineers do. And right now I have something that needs fixing." Rachel pressed a button on the bed remote. A screen on the wall lit up, displaying a diagram. Technical, complex, something Marcus recognized immediately, even though he hadn't seen this kind of work in years. A portable dialysis machine. "This is Project Meridian. It's supposed to be our flagship humanitarian initiative. A compact, affordable dialysis unit designed for underserved communities, rural areas, places where patients drive 3-4 hours to get treatment because there's no clinic nearby." Marcus stared at the diagram, his engineer's brain lighting up like a switchboard after years of darkness. The design was elegant but overcomplicated, the kind of thing that looked impressive in a presentation and fell apart under real-world conditions. "It doesn't work." Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes suggested she'd been waiting for exactly that response. "We've spent 18 months and $47 million, and the prototype fails under field conditions. The filtration system is too complex. The power requirements are too high. The maintenance schedule is impossible for clinics without trained biomedical technicians. So simplify it." The words came out before Marcus could stop them, automatic as breathing. 13 years of fixing cars hadn't killed the engineer in him after all. It had just been waiting dormant for something worth solving. Rachel smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "That's what I said. My engineering team, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, gave me a presentation with 96 slides explaining why simplification would compromise efficacy. 96 slides is a pretty good sign that nobody knows what they're talking about. That's exactly what I thought." Silence settled between them, but different from before. Not awkward, loaded. Like two people standing on opposite sides of a door, both reaching for the handle, both knowing that once it opened, everything would change. "I'm not offering you money, Marcus. I'm offering you a job." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt his heart rate pick up, felt the familiar surge of hope he'd learned to kill before it could take root. A job. Director of Engineering Special Projects Division. $180,000 a year. Full benefits. Education fund for your daughters. $180,000. Marcus's brain stuttered on the number, unable to process it. That was 6 times his salary at Tony's. That was money he couldn't imagine, money that solved problems he'd stopped believing had solutions. You're out of your mind. Possibly. But I'm also right. I've watched my team throw money and credentials at this problem for 18 months. I need someone who understands how things work in the real world, not the theoretical world, not the boardroom world. The real one where machines break down and there's no tech support hotline and you fix it yourself or people suffer. Marcus stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the Chicago skyline. Gray and enormous and indifferent. $180,000 a year. That wasn't money. That was a different life. That was Sophie's travel team and Grace's inhaler and the electric bill paid on time and groceries that included jelly and maybe a house that didn't lean to the left. But it was also a trap. He'd seen traps before. Corporate traps. You walked in thinking you were valued and you walked out with a box of your things and a severance check that didn't cover a month's rent. Why me? You could hire anyone. You could hire 10 anyones with better resumes and fancier degrees. Why the mechanic who pulled you out of a river? Rachel met his eyes without hesitation, because the mechanic who pulled me out of a river didn't ask what was in it for him first. Marcus turned from the window, the Chicago skyline still burning in his peripheral vision. Rachel Sterling watched him with the patience of someone who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals and knew when to let silence do the work. I need someone on that team who builds things for people, not for shareholders. I've been in this industry long enough to know the difference. My Ivy League engineers design for presentations. They design for patents. They design for the next funding round. I need someone who designs for the woman in Mississippi who drives 4 hours 3 times a week because her kidneys are failing and the nearest clinic is in the next county. And you think that's me? I know that's you. You jumped off a bridge for a stranger. You think a man like that builds machines that don't work? Marcus stared at her. This woman who'd been dead for 90 seconds and come back with a clarity that most people spent their whole lives searching for. The offer sat between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric and impossible to ignore. I need to think about it. Take a week. I'll take as long as I need. Fair enough. He walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the handle, turned back. Rachel. Yes, your engineers. They're going to hate me. Probably. And when they do, they're going to wonder why the CEO hired a mechanic off the street. Let them wonder. And when this goes sideways, because things like this always go sideways, you'll have to choose between me and them. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes hardened. The vulnerability from moments before disappeared, replaced by the woman who'd clawed her way to the top of a ruthless industry and stayed there. Marcus I died in that river. For about 90 seconds I was dead. And the one thing I remember from those 90 seconds is absolutely nothing. No light, no tunnel, no dead relatives waving hello, just nothing. And when I came back, when you brought me back, I made myself a promise. What promise? That I would never again waste my second chance on anything that doesn't matter. The monitor beeped. The city hummed beyond the windows. Rachel held his gaze without flinching. You matter. This project matters. The rest is noise. Marcus looked at her for a long time, reading the determination in her face, the absolute certainty of someone who'd touched death and walked away with new priorities. Then he nodded once and left. Sarah Mitchell was waiting in the hallway, her professional mask back in place, though Marcus thought he detected something that might have been genuine curiosity beneath it. How did it go? Your boss is either a genius or completely insane. Those aren't mutually exclusive. No, I guess they're not. Marcus walked to the elevator past the expensive carpet and the private rooms and the machinery of wealth that kept people like Rachel Sterling comfortable even when they were dying. The executive elevator descended in smooth silence, and Marcus rode it thinking about numbers. $180,000 a year. Sophie's travel team fees. Grace's inhaler without checking the bank account first. A house that didn't lean. The trap and the opportunity looked exactly the same from where he stood, and he had 7 days to figure out which one he was walking into. He drove home with the heater on full blast, not because he was cold, but because the noise helped him think. The Ford's engine rattled at 40 miles per hour, a sound he'd learned to interpret the way doctors interpret heartbeats. Needs valve adjustment. $200 in parts, 3 hours of labor. Money he didn't have work, he'd do himself in Tony's shop after hours if Tony was feeling generous. Mrs. Kowalski met him at the door when he arrived to pick up the girls. 68 years old, retired elementary school teacher, the kind of woman who'd raised 4 kids and knew exactly what a struggling parent looked like. Girls are fine. Lily's reading. Grace drew more tigers. Thanks, Mrs. K. She caught his arm as he reached for his wallet, her grip surprisingly strong for someone with arthritis in both hands. Marcus. Yeah, you look different. Different how, I don't know. Like something happened. Nothing happened. She said it the way old women said things when they knew you were lying and were going to let you get away with it because they understood that some truths needed time to emerge. Marcus paid her the $20 he owed down to $3 and change now and walked her to her door 2 houses down. Sophie was on the couch with a book when he came back inside, some young adult novel about kids with superpowers. Grace sat on the floor surrounded by tiger drawings, each one more elaborate than the last. Tigers in cars, tigers in spaceships, tigers wearing basketball jerseys. Daddy Grace launched herself at his legs with the full-body enthusiasm 9-year-olds brought to everything. Marcus caught her, lifted her despite his broken fingers, protesting, spun her once just to hear her laugh. Sophie won both games, I know. I was there, remember? I know you were there. I'm just reminding you because you forget things. I don't forget things. You forgot to buy jelly. That's fair. Sophie looked up from her book, studying Marcus with those old eyes that missed nothing. She didn't ask about the meeting with Rachel. Sterling didn't push for information he wasn't ready to give. But the question hung in the air between them anyway, unspoken but understood. Marcus made dinner scrambled eggs with toast and the last of the rice, and they ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, in the space that had been designed for a family of 4, back when Marcus had believed in things like stability and marriage and futures that worked out the way you planned. Grace talked about her tigers with the passionate detail only children could bring to made-up stories. Sophie ate quietly, occasionally glancing at Marcus when she thought he wasn't looking. After dishes, after homework, after Grace's bath and Sophie's reading time, and the careful choreography of bedtime routines, Marcus sat alone at the kitchen table. The house settled around him, old wood creaking, the furnace kicking on with a wheeze that suggested it wouldn't survive another Chicago winter. His phone sat on the table beside the stack of bills he'd been avoiding for 3 days. He picked it up, scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 11 years, and hit dial before he could change his mind. 3 rings, 4, 5. Hello. Uncle Ray's voice, rough with sleep and age, the sound of a man who'd spent 30 years as a union pipe fitter and still woke up with his hands aching despite being retired for 8. Uncle Ray. It's Marcus. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Marcus Webb. My God, I thought you fell off the earth. Almost. Listen, I need to talk to someone who won't lie to me. Son, it's 11 o'clock at night. I know. I'm sorry. But this can't wait. Ray was quiet for a moment, and Marcus could picture him sitting up in bed, turning on the lamp, settling in for whatever crisis had driven his nephew to call after 11 years of silence. When Ray spoke again, his voice had shifted from sleep to the focused attention of someone who understood that late-night calls meant something had broken. Talk to me. Marcus told him everything. The bridge, the river, the woman dying in the Mercedes, the hospital, the offer, the job that paid more than he could imagine and scared him more than jumping into freezing water ever had. Ray listened without interrupting, a skill he'd learned on construction sites where listening kept you alive and talking got you hurt. When Marcus finished, Ray was quiet for a long time, long enough that Marcus started to wonder if the old man had fallen asleep. Then Ray spoke, and his voice carried the weight of 70 years lived hard and honest. 180,000. Yeah. And you're thinking about saying no. I'm thinking about all the ways this blows up in my face. Boy, let me tell you something. Your daddy, my brother, worked the same factory floor for 31 years. Never missed a day. Never complained. And when they shut that plant down, you know what they gave him. Marcus knew. He'd been there. A handshake and a pension that barely covered his medication. He died thinking loyalty meant something to those people. It didn't. It never did. I know, Uncle Ray. No, you don't know because you're doing the same thing. You've been punishing yourself for 13 years because some corporation decided you were expendable. You took that pink slip and you wore it like a scar, let it define everything that came after. You stopped being an engineer. You stopped being the man you were built to be. The words hit harder than Marcus expected, landing in places he'd been trying not to look at for over a decade. Ray wasn't finished. And now someone's offering you a door back and you're standing in front of it wondering if it's a trap. Everything might be a trap, son. Crossing the street might be. But you don't stop crossing streets, do you? What if I'm not good enough anymore? It's been years, Ray. Years since I've done real engineering work. The technology's moved on. The industry's moved on. What if I walk in there and I can't do it? Ray's laugh came through the phone, rough and genuine. You jumped off a bridge into a frozen river and punched through a car window and dragged a woman back from the dead, and you're worried about whether you're good enough. That's different. How? That was instinct. This is the real world. Budgets, boardrooms, people with degrees from schools I couldn't afford. Marcus, listen to me. Your daddy couldn't afford those schools either. Neither could I. Neither could anyone in this family. But we could build things. We could fix things. We could look at something broken and see what it was supposed to be. That's in your blood, son. No degree gives you that, and no layoff takes it away. Marcus pressed his forehead against the kitchen table phone to his ear and felt something crack inside his chest. Not breaking, releasing. The pressure he'd been holding for 13 years, the certainty that he wasn't enough, that he'd failed, that the world had weighed him and found him wanting. Take the job, Ray. Take the damn job. And if it blows up, you come stay with me and Gary and we'll figure it out together. But don't say no because you're scared. You didn't say no to that river. Don't say no to this. Marcus sat up, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Okay. Okay, what? Okay. I'll take the damn job. Good. Now let me go back to sleep. I've got church in the morning and the Lord doesn't accept tardiness. Thanks, Uncle Ray. Don't thank me. Thank that woman for having the sense to see what the rest of the world missed. Ray hung up. Marcus sat in the dark kitchen, phone in hand, and felt the weight shift. Not lighter, just different. The fear was still there, the doubt, the very reasonable concern that he was walking into something that would chew him up and spit him out. But underneath it, growing like a seed in cracked concrete, was something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying, impossible to ignore. He pulled up Sarah Mitchell's number and typed a message before he could change his mind. I'm in. When do I start? The reply came in under a minute. 11:30 on a Saturday night, and a billionaire's assistant was still awake, still waiting, still paying attention. Monday, 8 a.m., Apex Tower, 1200 South Michigan Avenue, 38th floor. Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself. Marcus read the message 3 times. Wear whatever makes you feel like yourself. Not a suit, not corporate casual, not the costume of someone pretending to be something they weren't. Rachel Sterling wanted the mechanic from the South Side, the man who jumped into Rivers, the engineer who'd been buried under 13 years of poverty and hadn't quite died. He could do that. He could be that. Marcus went to bed at midnight and lay awake until 2, his mind spinning through scenarios. What he'd say to Tony Moretti on Monday morning. How he'd explain to Sophie and Grace that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't imagine. Whether this was the best decision he'd ever made or the stupidest. At 5:30 Monday morning, Marcus woke to his alarm and the familiar routine of early shifts. Then he remembered. No more early shifts. No more Tony's auto repair. No more $14 an hour and counting change and choosing between electricity and groceries. Today Marcus Webb started over. He showered, shaved, put on his cleanest jeans and the button-down shirt he'd ironed Saturday. Work boots polished to a shine that didn't quite hide their age but showed respect for the effort. This was who he was. A man who worked with his hands, who understood machines from the inside out, who'd learned engineering in classrooms and perfected it in reality. Sophie and Grace were still asleep when he left. He'd woken them earlier, told them about the job, watched Sophie's face transform from careful neutrality to something that looked dangerously close to joy. Grace had demanded to know if this meant they could get the tiger stuffed animal she'd been eyeing at Target for 3 months. Marcus had said yes without checking the price tag, and the word had felt like flying. The drive downtown took 40 minutes in morning traffic. Apex Tower rose against the November sky, 44 stories of glass and steel on South Michigan Avenue, the kind of building that made you feel small just looking at it from street level. Marcus parked 3 blocks away. The building's garage cost more per hour than he used to make, and walked the remaining distance. The lobby was everything he'd expected and nothing he was ready for. Marble floors, security desk manned by guards in suits nicer than anything Marcus owned. People moving fast with purpose, coffee cups in hand, the quiet confidence of professionals who belonged there and knew it. Marcus approached the security desk, suddenly aware of his work boots on marble, his jeans among pressed slacks, his entire existence as an outsider in a world that didn't have room for people like him. The guard looked up, took in Marcus's appearance, typed something into his computer. His expression shifted from professional courtesy to mild confusion. "Can I help you, sir, Marcus Webb? I'm starting today. 38th floor." The guard frowned, typed again, his confusion deepening. "I don't see you in the system, Mr. Webb. Sarah Mitchell set it up. I'm supposed to meet her at 8. The guard picked up a phone, spoke quietly into it, his eyes never leaving Marcus. The conversation lasted maybe 10 seconds. When he hung up, his entire demeanor had changed. Confusion replaced by something that looked almost like respect. "Executive elevator, sir. To your right. Ms. Mitchell is expecting you." Marcus walked to the elevator, aware of eyes following him. Aware that he looked exactly like what he was, a man who didn't belong. The elevator doors opened to reveal polished chrome and soft lighting, the kind of elevator that existed in a separate reality from the world Marcus had inhabited for 13 years. He rode up alone, watching the floor numbers climb, and felt his heart rate increase with each digit. 20, 30, 35, 38. The doors opened. Sarah Mitchell stood waiting, exactly as professional as she'd been at the hospital, wearing a different suit but the same expression of controlled efficiency. She extended her hand. "Mr. Webb, welcome to Apex Medical. Miss Mitchell, please call me Sarah. I'll give you a brief orientation then. Dr. Sterling wants to see you at 9. How is she?" "She was released from the hospital Thursday. She's been in the office since Friday." Marcus stopped walking. 2 days after leaving the hospital, after hypothermic cardiac arrest. "That's Rachel." Sarah said it with the tired familiarity of someone who'd spent years trying to slow down a force of nature and had long since given up. She led Marcus through the floor, past cubicles and conference rooms, and the low hum of a company in motion. Engineers hunched over monitors, technicians assembled prototypes. Project managers argued about timelines with the passionate intensity of people who cared deeply about things Marcus didn't yet understand. His office was at the end of a hallway corner position with windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Real windows, not the painted-over slits he'd grown used to at Tony's. A desk made of actual wood. A chair that looked like it cost more than his monthly rent. Everything clean new, waiting for him to claim it. "Your team is 12 people. All senior engineers. They've been briefed on your arrival. Briefed how they know Dr. Sterling personally recruited you. They don't know the details of how you met. So they're going to Google me. They already have. Your LinkedIn hasn't been updated since 2009. I don't have LinkedIn. You do, actually. Meridian Manufacturing created a profile when you started there. It still lists you as a mechanical engineer, employment ending 2009. Great. So they think I've been unemployed for 16 years. They think what they think. You'll have to show them otherwise. Sarah handed him a badge, corporate blue, with his photo already printed on it. His name in bold letters, Marcus Webb, Director of Engineering. The title looked fake, like someone had made it as a joke. 9 o'clock. Rachel's office, 40th floor. Don't be late. Marcus spent the next 45 minutes in his new office trying to process the reality of having an office at all. He sat in the expensive chair, tested the desk drawers, looked out at Lake Michigan, stretching gray and enormous toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, just a few miles north, was the Pleasant Valley Bridge where he'd jumped into freezing water and changed his life without meaning to. At 8:50, he took the elevator 2 floors up. Rachel's office was twice the size of his, with floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the entire east wall into a view of Chicago waking up. Rachel stood behind her desk, not sitting still, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body remembered dying even if her mind had moved on. A small bandage on her forehead marked where she'd hit something in the crash. Otherwise, she looked exactly like the CEO of a billion-dollar company, composed, focused, absolutely in control. "You came. I said I would. Sit down. We need to talk before you meet the team." Marcus sat. Rachel stayed standing, pacing slowly behind her desk the way people pace when they're thinking out loud and trust the person listening to keep up. Project Meridian is 18 months behind schedule and $47 million over budget. The board is restless. Some of them want to kill the project entirely and redirect the funding to commercial products with better margins. Why don't they? Because I won't let them. This project is the reason I built this company. Not the only reason, but the reason that matters. Portable dialysis for underserved communities. If we get it right, we save thousands of lives a year. If we get it wrong, we become just another medical tech company selling expensive equipment to wealthy hospitals. So what's the problem? The problem is, my team built something brilliant and completely unusable. The prototype works in a lab. It fails in the field. The filtration system requires calibration every 72 hours by a trained biomedical technician. The power consumption is twice what we projected. The component cost makes the unit too expensive for the communities it's designed to serve. Marcus leaned forward, his engineer's brain already dissecting the problem. Your team over-engineered it. They built the machine they wanted to build, not the machine people need. Rachel stopped pacing. That's what I've been saying for 6 months. So why didn't they listen? Because I'm the CEO, not an engineer. They respect my authority, not my opinion. They need to hear it from someone who speaks their language. They're not going to want to hear it from me. I know. And there's probably someone on this floor right now who thinks they should have gotten this job. Gerald Thornton, CFO. He's been pushing his own candidate, a VP from our Houston division. Very credentialed, very political, very much aligned with Gerald's vision for the company, which is profitability above impact. Gerald believes Meridian is a vanity project. He wants to pivot to high-margin commercial products and let the humanitarian stuff become a tax write-off. And you disagree, violently. Rachel's hands gripped the edge of her desk, knuckles white, and for the first time Marcus saw past the CEO to the person underneath. Someone who'd made mistakes, who carried guilt, who'd touched death and come back with unfinished business. Does Gerald know you hired me? He knows. He's not happy. You should expect resistance. Not from the engineers, they'll test you, but they're professionals. The resistance will come from above. How far above board level? Gerald has allies. 3 members who share his philosophy. If Meridian fails, they'll use it to push me out and reshape the company. Marcus absorbed this, the political landscape he was walking into, the knives being sharpened in rooms he'd never see. So this isn't just about a dialysis machine. No. This is about what kind of company Apex is going to be. And right now, you're the deciding factor. That's a lot of weight to put on a mechanic from the South Side. Rachel met his eyes, and in her expression Marcus saw something he recognized. Not hope. Hope was too fragile for someone like her. This was determination, the kind that built empires and refused to accept defeat even when defeat looked inevitable. You're not a mechanic anymore, Marcus. You haven't been for a long time. You just forgot. The team meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock. 12 engineers in a conference room, laptops, open coffee cups, full faces, carefully neutral in the way professionals mastered when forced to accept a stranger as their boss. Marcus stood at the front of the room with no slides, no presentation, no laptop, just himself and the problem, and 12 people who were about to decide whether he belonged here. "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm your new director. I'm not going to waste your time with a speech. I know you've been working on Meridian for 19 months. I know you're smart. I know this project matters to you. And I know you're wondering why Dr. Sterling hired someone you've never heard of." Nobody spoke. A few exchanged glances. Marcus had their attention, but attention wasn't the same as trust. "I'll answer that question by asking you one. How many of you have been inside a rural clinic, an underfunded hospital, a community health center in a town with one stoplight?" Silence. Then a woman in the back raised her hand, halfway tentative. "I did a rotation at a free clinic in Appalachia during my master's program. She was 31, maybe 32. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a Stanford sweatshirt over jeans. Professional but not corporate, the kind of person who'd chosen engineering because she wanted to solve problems, not climb ladders." What was it like, understaffed, under-equipped? The centrifuge was held together with duct tape. What was the most advanced piece of medical equipment in that clinic? She thought about it. Probably the blood pressure monitor. Digital. Donated by a church group. "And you designed a dialysis machine that requires a biomedical technician to recalibrate every 72 hours. The room shifted. Not hostile, uncomfortable. The discomfort of people who were smart enough to see the point and honest enough to feel it. The woman in the back, her badge red, Dr. Emily Carson, nodded slowly. Something like respect flickering in her eyes. "I'm not here to insult your work. You built something technically impressive. The engineering is sound. The problem isn't your talent. The problem is your assumptions. You designed this machine for the world you live in. A world with reliable, power-trained technicians, supply chains that deliver parts in 48 hours. That's not the world this machine is going to live in." A young engineer in the front row, glasses, neat beard, MIT ring, visible on his right hand, leaned forward. "With respect, sir, simplification at that level will reduce efficacy by 12 to 15%. What's the efficacy of a machine sitting broken in a closet?" The room went quiet. Marcus let the question hang there. Gave it weight, let it settle. 0. It's 0. A perfect machine that nobody can use is worse than a good machine that everyone can use. I'll take 85% efficacy in 1,000 clinics over 100% efficacy in 10. He could feel it shifting. Not agreement yet, but attention. Real attention. The kind you earn by saying something true. "We start tomorrow. Full tear-down review. I want every component on a table. I want to know what's essential, what's redundant, and what's there because someone wanted to be clever." Questions. The MIT engineer. Again. "How long do we have?" "Dr. Sterling wants a working prototype in 90 days. 90 days. The original prototype took 14 months. Then we'd better be faster than we were the first time." Marcus put the marker down. Looked at the 12 faces staring back at him and knew exactly what they were thinking. Who the hell is this guy? Where did he come from? What makes him think he can fix in 90 days? What we couldn't fix in 19 months? He didn't have answers that would satisfy them. Not yet. But he had something better. He had the absolute certainty of a man who'd spent 13 years fixing things that were supposed to be unfixable, who'd learned that the difference between broken and working was usually simpler than people wanted to believe. "See you at 8 tomorrow." He walked out. Behind him, the conference room erupted in conversation, the low, urgent buzz of people who'd just been shaken awake and weren't sure how to feel about it. Emily Carson caught up with him in the hallway 10 minutes later. She moved with the efficient purpose of someone who'd made a decision and intended to execute it before doubt could set in. "Mr. Webb, do you have a minute, Marcus?" "And yeah, I've got a minute. That thing you said, about assumptions, about designing for the world we live in instead of the world the machine lives in. That's the first time anyone said that out loud. It's the truth. I know. That's why nobody wanted to say it. They stood in the hallway, engineers walking past with curious glances, and Marcus saw something in Emily Carson's expression that looked like the beginning of alliance. Not friendship that would take time, but professional respect, the kind that mattered more in places like this. "I'd like to volunteer for whatever comes next. The redesign, the field testing, whatever you need." "Why?" "Because I went into engineering to build things that matter. And for the last year and a half, I've been building things that look impressive in PowerPoint. I'm tired of it." Marcus extended his hand. Emily shook it, her grip firm and certain. 8 o'clock tomorrow. Bring coffee. This is going to take a while." The rest of the day blurred past in meetings and introductions and the overwhelming tsunami of information that came with starting any new job. Marcus met the manufacturing team, the quality control specialists, the regulatory affairs people who would eventually shepherd Meridian through FDA approval if when they got it working. Everyone was professional. Everyone was curious. Everyone was clearly wondering what the hell Rachel Sterling had been thinking. At 6 o'clock, Marcus called it quits and drove home. The Ford rattled at 40 miles per hour, same as always, but the sound felt different now. Not broken familiar. A reminder of where he'd come from, who he'd been, what he'd survived. Sophie and Grace were waiting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Kowalski, who'd stayed late because Marcus had texted her about his first day running long. The babysitter bill would be brutal, 6 hours at $10 an hour. But for the first time in 13 years, Marcus looked at the number and didn't feel the familiar panic. $60. He had $60. He had a salary that made $60 barely register. How was it? Dad Sophie's question carried weight beyond the words. How was it really? Did they treat you okay? Are you going to make it? Is this real, or are we going to wake up tomorrow and find out it was all a mistake? It was good, Soph. Different. But good. Different how I have an office. With windows. And there's this team of engineers who probably think I'm crazy, but they're going to figure out I'm right. Sophie smiled and it reached her eyes for the first time in months. You've always been right about machines. Not always, but often enough. Grace wanted to know if his office had tigers. Marcus explained that offices didn't typically have tigers, but he could probably put some of her drawings on the wall. Grace immediately began planning which tigers would go where, her 9-year-old enthusiasm untouched by the cynicism that came with understanding how the world actually worked. After dinner, real dinner, chicken and vegetables and rice that didn't have to be rationed. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his laptop and started learning everything he could about portable dialysis technology. The Meridian prototype specs were in a shared drive Sarah had given him access to. 217 pages of technical documentation, CAD files, test results, failure analysis reports. Marcus read until midnight, his engineer's brain coming alive after years of dormancy. The machine was overdesigned exactly as he'd suspected. 5-stage filtration when 3 would work better. Power systems optimized for efficiency over reliability. Components chosen for performance metrics instead of field serviceability. It was the kind of design you created when you were trying to impress reviewers instead of help patients. Beautiful on paper, impossible in practice. Marcus could fix it. Not because he was smarter than the team that had built it, they were brilliant, better educated, more current on the latest technology. But because he understood something they'd forgotten or never learned, the best solution wasn't the most elegant one. It was the one that worked when everything else failed, when the power flickered and the parts were delayed, and nobody was coming to help. He fell asleep at the table, head on his folded arms, the laptop screen glowing with schematics that would haunt his dreams in the best possible way. Tuesday through Friday blurred together in a haze of intensive work. Marcus and Emily Carson stripped the Meridian prototype down to its component parts, spread across 3 work tables in the lab like an autopsy. 12 engineers became 8 committed allies, 3 skeptical observers, and 1 outright hostile opponent. A senior designer named Thomas Bradford, who'd led the original development team and clearly resented having his work torn apart by someone without a PhD. Marcus ignored Bradford and focused on the machine. The filtration system was the core problem. 5 stages meant 5 potential failure points, 5 maintenance intervals, 5 reasons for a rural clinic to give up and ship their patients 200 miles to the nearest hospital. Marcus redesigned it as 3 stages using commercially available membrane filters. Not exotic, not impressive, but reliable and replaceable with parts you could order from a medical supply catalog. The power system came next. The original design optimized for minimum energy consumption, which sounded good until you realized it required stable voltage and clean power that rural clinics couldn't guarantee. Marcus rebuilt it around a simpler motor with wider operating tolerances and added a hand crank backup that Emily initially laughed at until Marcus pointed out that hand crank mechanisms didn't care about brownouts or grid failures. It's primitive, it's functional, and when the power goes out during an ice storm and you've got a patient 40 minutes into treatment, functional beats primitive every time. By Friday afternoon, they had a new design. Simpler, more robust, field serviceable with basic tools. Emily ran the simulations while Marcus double-checked the mechanical specifications, his broken fingers making typing awkward but not impossible. Efficacy is at 86.4%. Emily looked up from her screen and Marcus could see she'd run the numbers twice, maybe 3 times, not quite believing them. That's 2% better than you promised. What's the failure rate? 2.3% in simulation, down from 34 on the original design. And the materials cost per unit drops from $18,700 to $9,200. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Not victory, they hadn't built anything yet, just proven it could work on paper. But it was progress, real and measurable, the kind that made 2 weeks of 14-hour days feel worthwhile. We need to build it. Manufacturing says they can have parts in a week. Then we build it week after next. And if it works, when it works. When it works, we take it to the field. Real clinic, real patients, real conditions. Emily's expression shifted from professional satisfaction to something deeper. Personal investment, the kind that came from remembering why you'd chosen this work in the first place. I know a clinic. Greenville, Mississippi. Delta Community Clinic. I did my rotation there. Will they let us test if the machine works? They'll beg us to test. They've got 2 dialysis units serving 19 patients. Both machines are 15 years old and breaking down constantly. Marcus nodded, already running through logistics in his head. Field testing meant travel, meant time away from Sophie and Grace, meant trusting that this machine wouldn't fail spectacularly in front of people who desperately needed it to work. Set it up. Soon as we have a working prototype, we go. Rachel's office, 4 weeks into Marcus's tenure at Apex Medical, felt different from that first meeting. Less formal, more collaborative. Rachel sat behind her desk reviewing the redesigned specs Marcus had submitted, her expression unreadable in the way CEOs perfected when they were processing information that could make or break a company. You did this in 4 weeks. The team did it. I just pointed them in the right direction. Don't be modest, Marcus. It's unattractive and inaccurate. She closed the folder, leaned back in her chair, and studied him with those blue eyes that missed nothing. The board wants a demonstration. Internal only, not full board. 3 observers. Next Tuesday. We haven't built the physical prototype yet. We'll have parts Monday. If everything goes right, we can have it assembled by Tuesday morning. And if everything doesn't go right, then we present simulations and promise them a working unit by end of week. Rachel smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she'd expected exactly that answer. There's something else you should know. Gerald Brennan has been asking questions about you. Your hiring process, your background, your qualifications. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest he's looking for ammunition. He doesn't like that I brought you in without board approval. He doesn't like that you don't have the traditional credentials. And he really doesn't like that Meridian might actually work, because that undermines his entire argument for killing it. Marcus absorbed this, the political machinery grinding away in rooms he'd never see, decisions being made about his future by people who'd never met him. What do you need from me? Make it work, Marcus. Make it undeniable. Build something so good that even Gerald can't argue against it. And if I can't? Rachel's expression hardened, the CEO emerging fully, now the woman who'd survived in a ruthless industry by being harder and smarter and more relentless than everyone trying to take her down. Then we both lose our jobs and Meridian dies and thousands of people keep driving hundreds of miles for treatment they could get locally. So I suggest you make it work. The physical prototype came together over a chaotic 72 hours that Marcus would later remember as the purest engineering work he'd done in 16 years. Manufacturing delivered parts. Monday at noon, filters, pumps, housing components, electrical systems, and by Monday evening the lab looked like a mechanical explosion frozen mid-blast. Components spread across 6 work tables, Emily coordinating assembly teams while Marcus moved between stations, troubleshooting issues as they emerged. The filtration module fought them until 2 in the morning. The membrane seals wouldn't seat properly, leaking saline during pressure tests. Thomas Bradford stood in the corner with his arms crossed, watching Marcus and Emily tear down the assembly for the 4th time. This is what happens when you rush engineering. Precision takes time. Marcus didn't look up from the seal he was examining under magnification. Precision also takes knowing which tolerances actually matter. Emily handed me the calipers. The problem wasn't the seals, it was the housing interface machined to specs that looked perfect on paper, but created micro gaps under operational pressure. Marcus called manufacturing, got them to remill 3 components with adjusted tolerances, and by 4 a.m. the filtration module held pressure without leaking. Bradford left without comment. Emily stayed. You need sleep. I need this working by 9 a.m. Marcus, you've been here 19 hours straight, and I'll be here 19 more if that's what it takes. Emily studied him in the harsh fluorescent light, and Marcus knew what she was seeing. A man possessed, driven by something beyond professional obligation. She didn't push further, just handed him coffee, and went back to calibrating the power management system. By 8 a.m. Tuesday, they had a working prototype. Compact, modular, ugly, in the way functional things often are when aesthetics take a back seat to reliability. Marcus ran it through a full diagnostic cycle while Emily documented everything for the demonstration. Pressure-stable flow rates, consistent power consumption, 38% below the original design. It works. Emily's voice carried disbelief despite the data on her screen confirming what her eyes were seeing. You sound surprised. I am. A little. We rebuilt this thing from scratch in 4 weeks. That shouldn't be possible. It's possible when you stop trying to impress people and start trying to help them. The demonstration was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Board observers arrived at 9:53 of them, just as Rachel had warned. Margaret Liu, venture capitalist, late 50s, the kind of woman who evaluated everything through ROI calculations. David Cross, former pharmaceutical executive, early 60s retirement money, looking for safe investments. And Richard Brennan. Marcus had heard about the CFO but hadn't met him until that moment. 58, silver hair, expensive suit, the smile of a man who knew how to be pleasant while planning your professional execution. He shook Marcus's hand with practiced warmth. Mr. Webb, I've heard remarkable things about your work, just trying to solve problems. Yes, well, let's hope this particular problem has a solution. We've invested considerable resources. The subtext landed clear as daylight. We've invested millions, and you're the mechanic who thinks he can fix it. Marcus released Brennan's hand and focused on the prototype. Rachel entered precisely at 10, moving with the controlled energy of someone who'd recovered from nearly dying, but still carried the memory in her bones. She nodded at Marcus, took her position at the front of the room. Thank you for coming. As you know, Project Meridian has faced significant challenges. Marcus Webb joined us 5 weeks ago with a mandate to redesign the system for real-world deployment. Marcus, please proceed. No preamble, no elaborate introduction. Marcus appreciated that. He activated the prototype, walked the observers through each system. Filtration, power management, backup mechanisms, while Emily monitored data feeds. The machine hummed to life, processing saline solution through the filtration cycle exactly as designed. Our target communities often face power instability. The original design required clean voltage within a narrow range. This version operates across a much wider spectrum. He demonstrated by deliberately introducing voltage fluctuations. The prototype adjusted automatically, maintaining stable filtration despite power inconsistencies that would have crashed the original system. And when power fails completely, Margaret Liu's question carried skepticism wrapped in professional courtesy. Marcus had Emily shut down the electrical supply. The motor stopped. He engaged the hand crank mechanism built into the base housing. Manual backup, no electricity required. Flow rate drops to 70%, but treatment continues. He cranked steadily, and the display showed filtration resuming slower but functional. Margaret's expression shifted from skepticism to something that might have been reluctant approval. Component cost $9,200 per unit, down from $18,700. Maintenance requirements, field serviceable with basic tools. No specialized technician required. We've designed it so a registered nurse with a high school education can perform routine maintenance. David Cross leaned forward, studying the data Emily had projected on the screen. Efficacy, 86.4% in simulation. We're preparing for field testing to validate real-world performance. Richard Brennan, who'd been silent throughout the demonstration, finally spoke. Impressive technical work, Mr. Webb, though I notice these are simulations, lab conditions. How confident are you this will perform in actual clinical settings? The question sounded reasonable, almost supportive. Marcus heard the trap anyway. Confident enough to stake my job on it. Bold. Though I should point out that Dr. Sterling hired you without standard board approval for director-level positions. Some might question whether proper vetting occurred. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. Rachel's expression went carefully blank, the way it did when she was controlling anger that wanted to ignite. Richard, this is a technical review, not a personnel discussion. Of course, I'm simply noting that unconventional hiring processes sometimes lead to unexpected outcomes. Marcus felt Emily tense beside him. Margaret and David exchanged glances that suggested this wasn't the first time Brennan had weaponized concern for protocol. Rachel stood, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd built a billion-dollar company and wasn't about to watch it get torn apart by corporate politics. Marcus has delivered results in 5 weeks that the previous team couldn't achieve in 19 months. His hiring process is irrelevant, measured against his performance. Are there technical questions about the redesign, or are we finished here? Brennan smiled, pleasant as ever. No further questions. Excellent work, Mr. Webb. I look forward to seeing how this performs in the field. The observers filed out. Rachel waited until the door closed before turning to Marcus. That was a warning shot. I noticed. Richard doesn't like being proven wrong. He's been arguing for months that Meridian should be shut down. Your success makes him look foolish. So what's he going to do about it? Find a way to discredit you, discredit the project, or both. Be careful, Marcus. Corporate warfare looks civilized, but it's warfare nonetheless. Field testing in Greenville, Mississippi required logistics. Marcus hadn't considered since his days doing industrial installations. Equipment shipping, travel arrangements, coordination with the clinic. Emily handled most of it with the efficiency of someone who'd done clinical rotations and understood the machinery of healthcare beyond the engineering. Marcus flew to Memphis on a Tuesday in early December, drove 3 hours south in a rental car with Emily riding shotgun and 2 Meridian prototypes secured in the trunk. The landscape changed as they drove urban, giving way to rural, the Mississippi Delta, spreading flat and agricultural under gray December skies. Delta Community Clinic sat on a 2-lane road between a Baptist church and a Dollar General, exactly as Emily had described. Single-story brick building, parking lot half full with vehicles that had seen better decades. The kind of place that served communities forgotten by everyone except the people who lived there. Nurse Dolores Washington met them at the door. 61, black, built like someone who'd carried heavy things her whole life. Equipment responsibility, other people's grief. Her handshake nearly broke Marcus's fingers. You're the ones with the machine. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. I work for a living. Call me Dolores. Dolores. I'm Marcus. This is Dr. Emily Carson. Dolores looked Emily up and down, assessing. Doctor of what? Biomedical engineering. MIT. Well, MIT, let me show you where we're putting this thing. The dialysis room had 4 stations, 2 of which were out of service because the existing machines needed parts that were back-ordered from a supplier who didn't prioritize rural clinics. Dolores explained it matter-of-factly, no complaint in her voice, just the weary acceptance of someone who'd learned that need and urgency meant nothing to procurement departments. We've got 19 dialysis patients. 7 of them drive over an hour each way 3 times a week. 2 have missed treatments this month because they couldn't afford the gas. Marcus felt the weight of that settle in his chest. Missed treatments. People choosing between transportation and survival, their kidneys failing, while they calculated whether they had enough money to reach the place that kept them alive. If this machine works, it changes everything for these people. If it doesn't, I'm going to drive to Chicago and throw it through your office window personally. Fair enough. Installation took 2.5 hours. Marcus had designed it to be installed by one person with basic tools in under 4, and with Emily's help they beat that by 90 minutes. Dolores watched the entire process, asking questions sharper than anything the board observers had posed. What happens when the power goes out? Battery backup. 6 hours of continuous operation. 6 hours. Our power went out for 14 hours during the last ice storm. Then you switched to the manual pump. Here. Marcus showed her the hand crank mechanism. Dolores studied it, turned the crank experimentally, watched the display show filtration continuing without electrical power. A hand pump. Like the old days. Like the old days. Because the old days didn't have reliable electricity either, and people still got treatment. She looked at him differently after that. Not with the polite skepticism she'd started with, but with something closer to trust. The trust of someone who'd spent 3 decades in a broken system and could recognize when somebody understood it from the inside. The first patient treated on the Meridian prototype was James Harwell, 68, white, retired cotton farmer who'd been driving 90 minutes each way to Vicksburg for dialysis 3 times a week for 11 years. His truck was 20 years old. His wife Martha had stopped working to drive him because the last time he'd gone alone, he'd nearly passed out on the highway coming home. James sat in the chair and looked at the machine. This thing's safe. Emily, who'd prepared for this question with data and reassurance, opened her mouth to respond. Marcus spoke first. Safe as anything in medicine. Safer than most. That's not saying much. Mr. Harwell, I built this machine. My name is on every component. If something goes wrong, you look at me. You're going to sit here for 4 hours. I'm going to sit here until you tell me to leave. James studied Marcus for a long moment. Then he extended his arm for Dolores to insert the fistula needle. All right then, let's see what you got. The treatment ran 4 hours and 12 minutes. Marcus sat in the corner the entire time, monitoring readouts on his tablet, watching every number, every fluctuation, every pressure reading. Emily took notes. Dolores came in and out, checking on James, adjusting pillows, bringing water. The machine hummed steadily, processing blood through artificial filtration, the way healthy kidneys did, naturally removing toxins that would kill James if they accumulated. At the end, James stood slowly, carefully testing his legs. How do you feel? About the same as usual, maybe a little less tired. Less tired is good. Less tired is unusual. Normally after dialysis I feel like I've been run over. That might be the lower flow rate. We adjusted the cycling to reduce stress on your cardiovascular system. James blinked. I don't know what any of that means. It means the machine is gentler. Well, I like gentle. My wife's going to like gentle. She's been worrying herself sick every time I go to Vicksburg. You won't have to go to Vicksburg anymore. James looked at the machine, then at Marcus, then at Dolores. Something shifted in his face. Not gratitude exactly, but the specific emotion of someone who'd been carrying a heavy thing for a very long time and just felt someone take part of the weight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Come back Thursday. Let's make sure it works twice. James came back Thursday, and the following Monday and Wednesday. The machine worked every time. Failure rate 0. Efficacy 87.1%, slightly better than simulation had predicted. The battery backup held through a 3-hour power outage on Thursday afternoon, and Dolores later reported that the hand pump worked perfectly during the outage operated by a nursing student with 6 weeks of training. Marcus called Rachel from the parking lot outside the clinic after the 5th successful treatment. "It works." Her voice came through the phone tight with controlled emotion. "Really works. Really works. We've done 12 treatments over 8 days. 0 failures. Patients are tolerating it better than the old machines. Dolores says it's the best piece of medical equipment she's seen in 27 years. Rachel's voice caught just for a second, and Marcus heard everything she didn't say. Relief, vindication, the weight of 6 years carrying guilt for the people who'd died because she'd rushed a product to market. Meridian wasn't just a machine to her, it was penance redemption proof that she could do it right when it mattered. "When are you back tomorrow evening? We're leaving one prototype here, taking the other for documentation. The board wants a full presentation next Tuesday. Prepare to defend every aspect of the design. Richard has been asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's looking for problems." "Be ready." Marcus hung up and found Emily standing beside the rental car looking back at the clinic. "You okay?" "Yeah, that's why I went into engineering. That right there. James Harwell getting treatment locally instead of driving 3 hours round trip. That matters more than any patent or publication." "It does. Thank you for letting me be part of this. I didn't let you. You earned it." They drove back to Memphis in comfortable silence, the kind that settles between people who've worked toward something meaningful and achieved it. Marcus's phone buzzed repeatedly, texts from Sophie wanting to know when he'd be home, messages from Sarah about logistics for the board presentation, an email from manufacturing about production scaling if the board approved full deployment. But underneath it all, growing like pressure in a sealed system, was the awareness that success had made him a target. Richard Brennan didn't like being proven wrong, and men like that didn't concede gracefully. They adapted, strategized, found new angles of attack. The board presentation was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Tuesday. Marcus arrived at noon to prepare, running through slides with Emily and rehearsing responses to anticipated questions. The boardroom on the 42nd floor was larger than any space Marcus had worked in, windows overlooking downtown Chicago, a conference table that could seat 20. 9 board members attended. Rachel sat at one end, Richard Brennan at the other, positioning that spoke volumes about the power dynamics at play. Marcus recognized Margaret Liu and David Cross from the internal demonstration. The others were new faces, successful people with investment portfolios and strategic interests Marcus could only guess at. Robert Hastings, board chair, called the meeting to order. "We're here to review Project Meridian field trial results. Mr. Webb, please proceed." Marcus pulled up the first slide, video footage of James Harwell receiving treatment at Delta Community Clinic. Not data, not charts. Just an elderly farmer in a chair talking to the camera about not having to drive to Vicksburg anymore, about seeing his granddaughter's high school graduation because local treatment meant he wasn't exhausted 3 days a week. "We conducted 12 treatments across 8 days. 5 different patients. 0 failures. Average efficacy 87.1%. Cost per treatment $47 compared to $280 at the nearest hospital. Patient-reported outcomes showed significant improvement in post-treatment fatigue." He walked them through the data methodically: power consumption, maintenance requirements, component reliability. Emily had prepared comprehensive documentation, every claim backed by measurement, every assertion supported by evidence. Marcus kept his language clear, avoided jargon, spoke like he was explaining machinery to someone who needed to understand it, not someone he was trying to impress. Questions. Margaret Liu went first. "Manufacturing scalability. If we approve production, what's the timeline for 500 units? Manufacturing says 9 months for initial production run. Component suppliers are already identified, all commercial parts with multiple sourcing options." David Cross followed. "FDA approval process. We've filed for Class 2 medical device clearance, fast-track humanitarian use designation, 6-month timeline, possibly shorter given the field trial data." Other board members asked technical questions, financial questions, questions about market positioning and competitive landscape. Marcus answered each one directly, honestly, admitting when he didn't know something rather than guessing. Then Richard Brennan spoke. "Mr. Webb, I want to commend your technical work. The Greenville results are encouraging. However, I have concerns about process and risk management." The room shifted attention, focusing on Brennan with the wariness of people who recognized a knife being drawn even when it stayed sheathed. "What concerns your hiring process, for one? Dr. Sterling brought you aboard without standard board approval for director-level positions. No background check, no reference verification, no competitive search." Marcus felt his pulse accelerate but kept his expression neutral. "I was hired based on demonstrated capability and Dr. Sterling's judgment." "Yes, well, judgment is subjective. Background verification is not. We've since learned you have no signed NDA on file from your hiring date." Rachel started to speak, but Brennan continued smoothly. "Additionally, your former employer, Meridian Manufacturing, has no record of your departure being voluntary. The official file lists you as terminated for performance issues." Marcus's chest tightened. That was a lie, a deliberate distortion. He'd been laid off during restructuring, same as 200 others. Performance had nothing to do with it. "That's not accurate. I was laid off during I have the HR file here, Mr. Webb. It clearly states termination." Brennan slid a folder across the table. Marcus opened it, saw his own employee record from 2009, saw the box checked next to terminated instead of laid off. A clerical error or deliberate misclassification to save money on unemployment benefits. Either way, it looked bad. "This is a paperwork mistake. I was part of a mass layoff. 200 employees. The company went bankrupt in 2011. So you claim. But we have no way to verify that, do we? The company's records are sealed in bankruptcy proceedings." Margaret Liu frowned. "Richard, where is this going? I'm simply suggesting that proper vetting would have revealed these discrepancies." "Mr. Webb may be talented, but we have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure everyone with access to proprietary technology has been thoroughly vetted." Rachel's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Marcus has delivered results. That's what matters. Results matter. So does process. I move that we place Mr. Webb on provisional status pending a full background and security review." David Cross, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "Second." Hastings looked uncomfortable but followed protocol. Motion on the floor. Discussion. Rachel leaned forward and Marcus could see her calculating angles, trying to find the argument that would shift votes. But Brennan had chosen his ground carefully. Background checks, security protocols, fiduciary responsibility, these were reasonable-sounding concerns that gave board members political cover. All in favor? 5 hands. Brennan's block plus 1 swing vote. Opposed 4 hands. Rachel's allies outnumbered. Motion passes. "Mr. Webb, you'll continue Meridian work under supervision with restricted access to sensitive systems pending review completion." Marcus stood there absorbing the hit, watching his authority get stripped away in real time. Not fired, that would be too obvious. Just hobbled, undermined, positioned for failure. "What does provisional status mean for the field trials?" Hastings glanced at Brennan before answering. "You can continue technical work, but strategic decisions require director-level approval, which you temporarily lack." Which meant Marcus could build machines but couldn't deploy them, could solve problems but couldn't make the choices that mattered. Rachel's expression remained controlled, but Marcus saw fury burning beneath the surface. "Are we finished?" "One more item." Brennan opened another folder. "We've received an inquiry from MedTech Solutions regarding potential IP infringement. They claim some Meridian components utilize proprietary filtration technology covered by their patents. That's ridiculous. We're using commercial membrane filters available to anyone." "Perhaps. But the inquiry raises questions, particularly given that your ex-wife works for MedTech Solutions in their Denver office." The room went dead silent. Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him, the trap springing closed with the precision of something that had been engineered from the start. "My ex-wife works in billing. She doesn't have access to technical information. She doesn't know what I do." "I'm sure that's true. But appearances matter, Mr. Webb. The optics of potential conflict of interest could damage Apex's position if this becomes a patent dispute. Rachel stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. Richard, my office. Now. She walked out. Brennan followed unhurried, the faint smile of someone who'd executed his strategy perfectly. The other board members filed out, avoiding eye contact with Marcus, who stood there feeling like he'd just been publicly dismantled and wasn't quite sure how it had happened. Emily waited until the room cleared. That was a setup. Yeah. The HR file, the patent inquiry, the ex-wife connection. He had all of that ready. He was waiting for the right moment. And I walked right into it. Marcus gathered his materials, hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and anger. 5 weeks of work, 12 successful treatments, a machine that actually helped people. None of it mattered when someone with power decided you were a threat. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. Rachel's office 30 minutes later. She stood at the window looking out at the city, and Marcus could see tension in her shoulders, the controlled fury of someone who'd just been outmaneuvered and was calculating her response. He planned that. Every word. I know. The HR file is probably legitimate, just misclassified. The patent inquiry is likely nothing, but it'll take months to resolve. And the ex-wife angle is pure invention. Andrea works in billing, but Brennan made it sound like corporate espionage. So what's the play? Rachel turned from the window. We accelerate. Deploy to sites 2 and 3 immediately. If both succeed, Richard loses credibility. The board can't ignore 3 successful field trials. I'm on provisional status. I can't authorize deployment. I can. You do the technical work. I'll handle the politics. And if it fails, if something goes wrong at Cairo or McAllen, then we're both finished. Richard becomes interim CEO. Meridian gets shut down. And you go back to Tony's auto repair. Marcus absorbed that the stakes laid bare. Success or oblivion, no middle ground. When do we start? Cairo goes live next week. You'll install personally. Emily handles McAllen simultaneously. 10 days to prove Meridian works, or watch Richard tear it all down. The shipment to Cairo, Illinois left on Thursday. 2 prototype units, carefully packed shipping logs documenting every step of the chain of custody, because Marcus knew someone would be looking for irregularities. He drove to Cairo himself, arrived Tuesday morning at Riverbend Health Center. Nurse Patricia Moore, 54, white, 19 years of experience, met him with professional skepticism. You're the engineer, Marcus Webb, Emily Carson called. Said you built something special. Special is generous. Functional is accurate. Functional works for me. Special just breaks in new and interesting ways. Installation went smoothly. 3 hours, both units operational. Patricia watching with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that new equipment either made her life easier or became her problem to manage. Marcus ran test cycles, checked calibrations, documented everything, while Patricia asked practical questions about maintenance schedules and troubleshooting procedures. First patient is tomorrow. William Thompson, 72, retired railroad worker, been going to Cape Girardeau for treatment, 90 miles round trip. We'll be ready. Marcus spent the night in a budget motel outside Cairo, reviewing specifications and trying not to think about how much depended on the next 48 hours. Emily texted from McAllen reporting successful installation. Rachel texted asking for status updates. Sophie texted asking when he'd be home. Soon, sweetheart. Just finishing up work. Okay. Grace says the Tigers miss you. Tell the Tigers I miss them too. Wednesday morning, William Thompson arrived at 7:30 for an 8 a.m. treatment. Tall, weathered, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had worked hard for 7 decades and was starting to send invoices for all that abuse. His wife accompanied him, quiet support in the background. Treatment started at 8:15. Marcus monitored every metric, watching data flows like they contained secret messages about the universe. 30 minutes in, everything looked perfect. Pressure stable, filtration rates within expected ranges, no alarms, no fluctuations. Then, at minute 35, the pressure alarm sounded. Marcus was at the machine before Patricia finished turning around. The filtration membrane showed elevated pressure, flow rate dropping. He checked the primary filter clog, but that shouldn't happen this early. He switched to the backup membrane. Same issue. What's wrong? Patricia's voice carried concern but not panic. Marcus pulled the membrane cartridge, examined it under the portable microscope he'd brought precisely for situations like this. Metal filings. Tiny, barely visible, but unmistakably there. Contamination that couldn't have occurred naturally. Someone tampered with this. What Marcus checked the second unit. Same contamination pattern. Both machines sabotaged between the warehouse and here the membrane cartridges compromised with metal particles designed to cause exactly this kind of failure. I need to call Chicago. He stepped outside, dialed Rachel's direct line. The Cairo units are sabotaged, metal contamination in the filtration membranes. Rachel's response came fast, sharp. Are you certain? Positive. This didn't happen accidentally. Someone accessed the shipment and contaminated both units. Can you fix it? I need clean membranes. 6-hour drive to Chicago, warehouse 6 back. I'll have them couriered. 4 hours. That's cutting it close. We have a patient scheduled. Do what you can, Marcus, but document everything. If this is sabotage, we need proof. Marcus photographed the contaminated membranes, logged everything, then made a decision that was either brilliant or catastrophic. He disassembled both units, hand-cleaned the membranes in the clinic's sterilization equipment, a painstaking process that took 2 hours and reduced efficacy but might restore functionality. Patricia watched occasionally, handing him tools, saying nothing but understanding everything. When he finished, Marcus ran test cycles. The filtration worked, but performance had dropped to 71%. I can run treatment at 71%. It's not optimal, but it's better than sending him 90 miles. Is it safe? Safe, yes. Optimal, no. But Mr. Thompson has been waiting weeks. If he's willing to accept reduced performance, we can proceed. William Thompson, when asked, didn't hesitate. Son, I've been getting treatment on machines older than my truck. If you say it's safe, that's good enough for me. The treatment ran 4 hours and 40 minutes longer than ideal because of reduced flow rates, but it completed successfully, no complications. William reporting he felt about the same as usual, maybe slightly more tired, but nothing concerning. How soon until you get the replacement parts? Should be here by end of day. We'll run you again Friday with full performance. Marcus stayed in Cairo 3 more days, running treatments at reduced capacity while waiting for clean membranes from Chicago. Emily reported from McAllen that her units were working perfectly, no contamination, no issues, success across the board. Which meant whoever sabotaged Cairo had targeted Marcus specifically. They wanted him to fail publicly, wanted proof that his redesign couldn't handle field conditions. The courier arrived Thursday at 6 p.m. with replacement membranes. Marcus installed them, ran diagnostics, brought both machines back to full operational status. Friday's treatments ran flawlessly. Saturday the same. By the time Marcus left Cairo on Sunday, they'd completed 8 successful treatments despite the sabotage attempt. He drove back to Chicago with evidence of tampering documented in photographs and shipping logs, knowing he was walking into a war he barely understood. Rachel's office Monday morning. She sat behind her desk with Sarah standing beside her, both looking like they'd spent the weekend preparing for battle. Tell me everything. Marcus walked through it, the contamination, the emergency repairs, the successful treatments despite sabotage. Rachel listened without interrupting her expression, growing harder with each detail. The shipping logs show the Cairo truck made an unauthorized stop, 36 minutes at an industrial park 15 miles from the warehouse. Sarah pulled up security footage on the wall monitor. Grainy, distant, but clear enough to see a man in a gray suit approach the truck, watch the driver walk away for what looked like a smoke break, then enter the cargo area. 8 minutes later, the man left. The truck continued to Cairo. Can we identify him? Face is obscured. But Sarah pulled up another document, badge access logs from Apex's warehouse. Only one executive-level badge was checked out that evening, Richard Brennan's spare access card. He reported it lost the next morning. Marcus felt the pieces clicking together. Brennan had sabotaged the shipment, personally used his own access card, then reported it stolen to create plausible deniability. Arrogant but effective if nobody could prove he'd been the one in that industrial park. Can we take this to the board? Not yet. The footage doesn't show his face. The badge could have been stolen before he reported it. We need more. So what do we do? Rachel leaned back, calculating angles Marcus couldn't see. We make him think he won. Then we get him to confess. The plan was simple, in concept terrifying, in execution. Marcus would confront Brennan directly wearing a wire legal in Illinois under one-party consent laws and provoke him into admitting sabotage. Rachel would have the evidence she needed, and Brennan would be finished. And if he doesn't confess, then we lose. He becomes CEO. Meridian dies. And you're done in this industry. Marcus thought about Sophie and Grace, about James Harwell getting local treatment, about the 1,000 other patients who could benefit from a machine that actually worked. He thought about Richard Brennan and men like him who measured everything in profit margins and saw humanitarian work as inefficiency to be eliminated. Set it up. Tuesday evening, 7:30 p.m. Most of the office cleared out for the day. Marcus wore the recording device Sarah had provided, commercial equipment, completely legal, voice activated. He knocked on Brennan's office door. "Mr. Brennan, got a minute?" Richard looked up from his computer, surprise quickly masked by professional courtesy. "Mr. Webb." "Of course. Please." Marcus entered, showed appropriate concern. "That's showed appropriate concern. That's unfortunate. Supply chain issues happen. Not when the truck makes an unauthorized stop and someone with an Apex executive badge enters the cargo bay." Brennan's eyes sharpened, but his voice remained level. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof, security footage, badge access logs?" "The badge was stolen. I reported it missing. After the sabotage." Brennan leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the calculating assessment of someone deciding how much to reveal. "Marcus, let me explain something to you. You're a smart man, good engineer, but you don't understand how this world works. Vivian hired you because she's sentimental. She thinks saving lives matters more than saving the company, but companies don't run on sentiment, they run on profit, and Meridian is a money pit, so you sabotaged it." Richard was careful now, walking a line between arrogance and admission. "I didn't sabotage anything. But if I had, it would be because the board deserves to see Meridian's true viability. Lab tests don't mean anything. Field trials under realistic conditions, that's what matters. And if those trials expose weaknesses, even introduced weaknesses, then the project deserves to die." There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough for any reasonable person to understand what he'd done. "You just admitted to sabotage." Brennan smiled, pleasant and cold. "I admitted nothing. This conversation is off the record. Your word against mine. And I'm a CFO with 11 years here. You're a mechanic with 12 weeks. Who do you think the board believes?" Marcus pulled out his phone, showed the recording in progress. "I think they'll believe this." Brennan's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went dead and calculating. "That's inadmissible. You didn't inform me you were recording. Illinois is one-party consent. I only need my permission. You just made a very big mistake, Mr. Webb." Marcus left before Brennan could say more, sent the recording to Rachel immediately, then texted her. "Got it." He admitted to introducing weaknesses in field trials. Rachel's response came within seconds. "Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Well done." Marcus drove home that night knowing he'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Richard Brennan wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. The man would fight back, and Marcus had just made himself the primary target. Sophie was still awake when he arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with homework spread out in organized chaos. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." "Late-night history paper. Due tomorrow. I've been procrastinating." Marcus sat across from her, watching his 13-year-old wrestle with essay structure and historical analysis, and felt the dissonance between this moment and the corporate warfare he'd just walked away from. "How's the new job really?" Sophie's question carried weight beyond casual interest. She was asking if this was real, if they could trust it, if life was actually getting better, or if the universe was preparing to pull the rug out again. Complicated, but good. We're helping people, Soph. Really helping them. Is that why you look worried? Marcus smiled despite everything. When did you get so perceptive? I've always been perceptive. You just started noticing. He helped her with the history paper, the French Revolution causes and consequences, and tried not to see parallels between guillotines and boardrooms. At midnight, after Sophie went to bed, Marcus sat at the kitchen table reviewing the recording one more time. Brennan hadn't explicitly said, "I sabotaged the Cairo shipment," but he'd said enough. Introduced weaknesses, field trials under realistic conditions, enough for anyone listening to understand what he'd done and why. Tomorrow would either vindicate everything Marcus had worked for or destroy it completely. No middle ground, no compromise. Just truth versus power, and the board would decide which one mattered more. Marcus went to bed at 1 a.m. and lay awake until 3, mind spinning through scenarios, preparing for arguments, trying to anticipate every angle Brennan might use to deflect or counterattack. At 5:30 his alarm went off, and Marcus rose to face the most important day of his professional life.